about is the complicated ways in which the distant past is represented to us, or which we choose to represent the distant past. And it's really, in a way, it's got a target. It's an attempt to undermine one still very powerful archaeological myth about the uncovering and the preservation of the past. The myth that under the soil, the past lies waiting for us to excavate it. It's not actually a lecture about theory. I'm instead going to be playing with, I suppose, some potentially theoretical implications of one specific case study in the history of archaeology, in particularly the 19th century history of archaeology. That is the story of ancient Pompeii in the 19th century. In May 1884, Pompeii was, quote, revivified. The city that had been overwhelmed by the eruption of Vesuvius in 79 AD and re-excavated gradually since the middle of the 18th century was brought back to life in 3 days of re-enactments staged by a group of local antiquaries, artists and aristocrats. Re-enactments that were put on to raise money for the victims of a recent earthquake on the island of Ischia. Two strikingly different presentations of and reactions to the city of Pompeii in the 19th century, and they're the two vignettes really that lie at the heart of this lecture. As I said, I'm going to be wondering whether, in fact, for example, they do instantiate a kind of development in people's appreciation of Pompeii from romance, in the Mrs. Piozzi sense, to archaeology that people often claim. But at the same time, I'm going to be using them to explore the ways that the experience of Pompeii always was an experience of representation, fiction, and even fake, in a shifting dialectical relationship with, but structurally different from, ancient reality. But first, we need to reflect in a bit of detail on actually literally how the 19th century visitor encountered Pompeii. What was a visit to Pompeii like in the 19th century? First of all, I'm going to look at those who really went there, and then I'm going to look at those who visited it in their heads. They're largely British periodic time. Obviously, the nature of visiting the site changes dramatically over the 19th century, both in terms of the ease and safety of travel, and in terms of what you saw when you got there. But I want to finish by highlighting just a little bit more sharply that constant slippage you get between the fictional representation of Pompeii, particularly Bulwer and the spin-offs, and the historical, the slippage between representation and the real thing. Because this goes beyond the obvious point that the last days took great care to establish its archaeological authenticity. Much more striking is that almost straight away, this novel is being recommended as the best guidebook to the city. And discussions of Pompeii and the events of 79 in newspapers and periodicals regularly reprint Bulwer's version of the eruption, not the underplay. They've got a perfectly good ancient source, but they reprint the novel. Indeed, the classical fellow of St. John's he visited in 1840 and written later, at risk of losing all my reputation as a classicist, I thought of Bulwer, not of Cicero and Pliny, when I read that time. And so it was, when various forms of reconstruction of the city are attempted in England, you never quite know whether it's the real city that is being reconstructed or whether it's Bulwer's fiction. But as my very parting shot, I wanted to leave you with a wonderful Neapolitan reductio ad absurdum of the fictionalisation of Pompeii, though in fact one that's written decades before Bulwer's last days. Comes from a travel account to South Italy by Louis Engelbach, an interesting book called Campana Felice, written in English despite the title and the name. In the course of this book, Engelbach claims to have visited the site of Pompeii in the company of a free-thinking Neapolitan who claims that the whole site of the ancient city is a modern hoax. Quotes, "All you here behold, he says to the eager visitor as they go round, has been fabricated at immense expense, to be sure, by our Neapolitan government, chiefly to attract travellers from all parts of Europe and to make them spend money in the kingdom. Whenever these pretended excavations were carried on, the greatest care was taken not to admit anyone but those absolutely necessary to the execution of the work. Much work was done by night. In short, the greatest secrecy and mystery was used in the whole operation. Pompeii, in other words, this is even before Bulwer had written. Pompeii can be seen not simply as a fiction, but actually